This podcast is a frank discussion on sexual assault. If you are in the USA, for free and confidential help, call 1-800-865-HOPE. In Australia, for confidential counseling and support in cases of sexual assault or abuse, please call 1-800-RESPECT. Erin Aldrich Shean represented the United States of America in two separate sports, representing the USA national volleyball team and competing at the 2000 Summer Olympics in the high jump. Erin was ready to take her story of underage grooming and sexual assault by her college track coach to the grave until a trigger unleashed her darkest secrets of abuse. It is my privilege and honor to welcome Erin Aldrich Shean to Open Stance. Erin, hi, welcome to Open Stance. How are you?
Good, thank you.
First of all, why don't we just tell our listeners, where are you zooming in from today, Erin?
Yeah, so I am in Dallas, Texas.
Yeah.
I grew up in Dallas, but we just recently moved back here in September. We were in San Diego for about 10 years before that. So it's good to be home.
That's awesome. And okay, so you're a native Texan, and if somebody does a Google search on you, Erin, they're going to come up immediately with some pretty amazing sporting credentials. You are an Olympic class high jumper. You have been an elite volleyball player. And I've also heard, I think we spoke about this, you had a real love for tennis and you actually got recruited by a school for tennis. So quickly tell us about all these sports and how they all fit into your life.
Yeah, so the story that I love to tell is that I knew what I wanted to do early on. So when I was 6, I told my parents that I wanted to be an Olympian, and we would take our motorhome. My parents had bought a motorhome because they wanted us to experience all the states in the United States by the time we graduated high school. So they bought this motorhome, and every summer my dad would take, a couple months off of work. He was in commercial real estate, so he had that flexibility. And we would travel to a different part of the United States and just explore and discover. And it was great. We got to see all 50 states by the time we were maybe in high school. And wow. And it was 1984 when we were on a motorhome trip, and the opening ceremonies of the 1984 Olympics were on television. And I remember vividly turning to my parents and saying, I'm going to be an Olympian someday. And my parents were like, they were never really elite athletes themselves. So they were just kind of like, okay, well, it's good to have goals and dreams, honey. And I remember looking at them and being like, no, I don't think you understand. I'm going to be an Olympian someday. Like, take me seriously. And they were like, okay, well, keep working at it. It's good to have goals and dreams. And so it was really at that point that I made it a point to make an Olympic team someday. I started, really, really focusing on it, and it was in all of my goals. And I didn't know what sport it was going to be at that time. I was playing soccer. I played tennis. I was a ballerina, which was definitely not a good choice for me because I can't sit still long enough to look graceful as a ballerina, but I am tall and lanky. And so that worked for me. I was in gymnastics for a little while, but I was pretty much like a slinky trying to do any kind of back handspring or anything like that. So that didn't work. And I just kind of tried every single sport along the way. I went into basketball, which was an obvious fit for my height. And then the last 2 sports that I tried were volleyball and track when I got into elementary school. I just kind of went through that progression of, you play volleyball in the fall, and then you do basketball, and then you go into track and, summer. And so I did all the sports. And it was really when I got into those with volleyball and track that I was like, I think these are the sports.
Penny dropped.
Yeah. And then, you know, like I went onto the track, and of course I was so tall for my age that they were like, okay, you need to beeline it to the high jump apron. And so immediately started doing the high jump, and it was almost like I was like born to high jump.
Fantastic. And so that all of that was a runway for you to compete in the 2000 Sydney, Australia Olympics. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Which is where I'm zooming in from today. I'm down here as a California girl, living down here for 13 years now. But when I read that you were Olympian and got to know that history of you, it was pretty cool that you were down here.
Sydney is one of my favorites.
So that would have, so your dream, your dream came true. You made it to the Sydney Olympics. How was that?
Oh my gosh. So if you ask anyone who's been to a lot of the Olympic Games, like what the best Olympics were, Sydney almost always is one of the top 2 or 3. I've been to a few. I've been to Atlanta to watch. I've been to Atlanta. I competed in the 1996 Olympic trials, went to Atlanta to watch the Olympics because I was in high school, and I narrowly missed making the Olympic team that year. Obviously competed in Sydney. Amazing Olympics. And then I was an alternate in Athens in 2004. Blew out my knee right before 2008 for Beijing, so I didn't get to go to that one. 2012, I went as a spectator. Loved London. So London is one of my favorites too. But the other one that you hear about is Barcelona. Everyone says Barcelona, Sydney, and I think London was great. So it's kind of those 2 or 3 for me, from what I've heard and what I've experienced.
Oh, that's amazing.
Sydney was amazing.
Congratulations on that. That's just
thank you.
To make it to that level as an athlete growing up, just a phenomenal accomplishment and achievement. So listening to all that, your sporting career is just world class. And it's really interesting now, though, that when somebody goes to their Google search and looks you up, you see this impressive history of everything you've just talked about. But now there is another story that's attached to your name, and it has to do with the lawsuit.
Yeah, so it was interesting when we first started recording here, and you had said, you know, when you Google your name, all these great accomplishments come up, and I thought, man, I feel like when you Google my name now, those are like buried, and really what you see is what I'm going through right now, which was never, ever intended. I had planned on dying with this secret that I had, because it was just really too humiliating to let the public in on. And you know, you feel.
What secret? Right. What secret did you bury?
So when I was in high school, in the recruiting process, my coach, my future coach, I guess, at that time, he was the coach at the University of Arizona when he was recruiting me, groomed me into a position where it turned into a relationship prior to anything physical happening, because he wasn't physically in Dallas. He was just recruiting me. And so we would have like super lengthy phone calls. And that was kind of where that grooming process started. And then really the moment I turned 18, I made a World Junior Championship team in Sydney, and went to Sydney, Australia with Team USA. It was the first international competition I had ever been to. And my high school coach could not attend it with me. So my parents sent the next best person that they knew to send with me, giving him 100% of their trust, because he had essentially groomed them as well through the whole process. I think what we learn when we learn about grooming is that it's not just the victim that's groomed. There are also other victims in the process too, which can be your closest friends and family. And they do everything they can to earn the trust of those who are the most important people in your life. So they obviously trusted him with their daughter, you know, to send him with me to Sydney. And it was on the plane ride to Sydney, which was the first time really that I can remember that we were completely alone together, where the now what I call sexual abuse happened. At the time, it was an exciting thing for me to think about because of that grooming process and feeling like, you know, this was an exciting moment because we were going to actually be able to be alone and be, you know, become, you know, go into this relationship, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I look back at that story and I just think like, you know, I was super naive because I had never had a relationship with anyone, you know, of the opposite sex or at all at that time. So he was the first experience I had, the first physical, really emotional experience I had that was sexual. And so it's really horrifying to think about now. But yeah, I lived with it for years thinking.
Yeah. So there's a quote that is in one of the USA Today articles that I read, and it's an article that for me keeps coming up. There's so much in this article by Christine Brennan of USA Today. And in this article, there's a quote, and there's about 4 sentences from you, and each one has incredibly powerful meaning behind it. But the first sentence that you say is, "I stayed silent for over 20 years because the thought of coming forward was horrifying to me, but I decided that I couldn't stay silent any longer." So just starting with that bit before you go on to the next 2 sentences, 20 years, there was a time 20 years prior that you actually recognized at some stage there was a problem and that this was not the relationship you thought. It was an abusive, it was an abusive relationship and you were the victim here. But for 20 years after you had made that decision, something obviously was powerful enough in your life to trigger that, to bring it to the surface. So can you tell us at what stage you actually recognized that this was an abusive relationship and you had been the victim of this predator? And what was it in your life that was so powerful that it actually broke your silence and you were able to find your voice?
Yeah. As you're running through that, there are so many facets of this whole process that you want to that I would love to take everyone through. But what happened was I always knew that this is probably not appropriate. Like my coach was so much older than I was. He was married. But I almost felt like I couldn't control myself falling in love with this person. I mean, this is like one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, high jump coaches in the country. And he's kind of coming on to and like telling me that I'm beautiful. And he knew all of those things to say, because I was this lanky high school kid that so desperately wanted to, I had these crushes on these boys, but like to them, I wasn't attractive because I was like this tall, lanky, skinny girl that was taller than them and like super awkward in their eyes probably. And so I so badly wanted a relationship, but you know, I was just young at the time. And so he knew that, you know, and so he knew those buttons to push of
and did
beautiful
and did he know about the one, sorry to interrupt, the Olympic passion dream that you have, like the power you just mentioned? He's a specialist, most respected in the high jump, and he would be an absolute pathway to your Olympic dream. So that came across. Was that something?
100%. Like the only thing I would talk about at that time was how I wanted to break the world record. I had said when I was 6, I was going to make an Olympic team. That was all I thought about. Like, I almost missed my prom because I was, needed to go to state and win a state championship. And that was the most important thing to me at that time. So I didn't date. I was training all the time and doing everything that I could to make that team. So he knew those little pieces of my life to kind of work himself in there. And he was a very, very powerful person. He was what I thought my ticket was to get to the Olympics. So when he showed interest in me, I was like, oh my gosh, it was almost as if like a celebrity would like come on to you, and you would be kind of like butterflies, So I knew my parents taught me right from wrong, like my parents were great parents. I grew up in a very nuclear family, raised Catholic, very conservative. I knew right from wrong, but it's almost like you just can't control it because the grooming process is so strong. So fast forward 20 years later, this whole time I've felt terrible because I thought I broke his heart when I transferred to the University of Arizona, but to go to the University of Texas, but never let that happen again. Once I got to the University of Texas, I felt like I had broken his heart because I wouldn't let it happen again. He made a couple more advances towards me at the University of Texas, and I just didn't take the bait anymore because I knew by that time I was like, I dated a couple guys, I gotten a little smarter in that respect. And so I just didn't take the bait, and I always felt terrible. We turned into best friends and coach athlete only, but I just didn't do it. And so fast forward 20 years and I watched this movie documentary, Leaving Neverland, which is a huge piece in this story. And
did you know what this documentary was about, or did you come upon it just by sitting around one night and found it?
I remember my husband texting me, because we're always looking for like good documentaries or movies to watch together. And I remember my husband texting me and saying, we need to watch this documentary that just came out. It's called Leaving Neverland. And I was like, well, what's it about? And he's like, well, you know how Neverland was where Michael Jackson's big compound. And I was like, oh yeah. He's like, it just talks about like the whole, story of him and, the little kids and whether he was guilty or not. And I was like, oh yeah, we should watch that. Didn't really dawn on me, because I didn't understand how much of it was grooming, I hadn't connected the two yet. And so we lay down in bed and we turn it on and we're watching it. And my husband, by the way, doesn't know anything about this. I have not told a single solitary soul, not my best friend, not my parents, not my husband. I married the guy and didn't tell him, like you tell that your significant other everything.
Is it true that your former coach, John Rimbaud, actually went to your wedding?
Yes, he was in my wedding.
Right, in your wedding.
He was in my wedding as a groomsman, which is like, I will never be able to erase those pictures anymore. But that is how badly I felt for, stopping that relationship. And I just felt like, well, we have this super close connection. Obviously, when you make an Olympic team, your coach does become very close to you for, you're both accomplishing this great thing. So that's not unusual. And by the time I had made the Olympic team, there was no physical relationship there. So it was like making an Olympic team with your best friend kind of thing, and your coach.
He was your coach for the Olympic team?
Yes, because I was at the University of Texas.
Right.
So it was just a very strong relationship between coach athlete by that time. We knew obviously everything about each other because we had gone through this relationship prior. So I just remember laying down in bed with my husband, watching that documentary, and being like, thinking to myself, like, oh my God. And I almost like lost my breath, like became quiet and just kind of didn't really know what to do, because I was like, oh my gosh, like I was like one of those boys in that movie that was being groomed by this powerful person. Power imbalance, that's a huge thing. Like, cannot have a power imbalance of coach athlete and allow that to happen. It should never be allowed. And so I sat there and watched it from beginning to end, going like, what am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do about this? Because the memories started coming back into my head, and I got this flashback.
Triggered a lot.
Yeah, I got this flashback of Jessica Johnson, who is one of my, who's also in this class action lawsuit with me, one of the representatives. And I remembered him pulling me aside on the University of Texas track. It had to have been when I was like a senior, before the Olympics, not that long before, and him saying, you know, Jessica Johnson is accusing me of these things, but you know, I would never do that, right? And I was like, oh, absolutely not. Like, I had convinced myself that even though he did it to me, like he would never do it to anybody else, because it was like a one-off thing, and he was in love with me before, and like, you know, he would never do that to anybody else. What we had was real, you know? And I was like, no, of course not. I got your back, you know? And I literally like had his back. So if they would have ever approached me at that time, I would have been like, no, like she's crazy, you know? And I think it really hurt our relationship, because for 20 years, like, she's like, you never had my back, you know? But I just never believed he would do it to anybody else. But when I watched,
I watched all of Leaving Neverland after we chatted, because when you told me that was your trigger, I had to go see it. I watched the entire thing. I think it was like 5 hours of this thing. And what you were just talking about, that power imbalance, and there's a bit of brainwashing in that movie, where these young kids they fall in love with this, like you said, a celebrity figure, this powerful figure. They're young kids that are young and naive. You were young and naive, and just the is it brainwashing that you just couldn't or didn't want to see what was happening?
Yes.
When your teammate came to you and said, I need help, he's doing this, and you said no.
Yeah. Well, so I think he had put enough division between the two of us that she would never approach me about it. I just remember totally having his back and being like, no, I got you. Like, we're basically besties at this time. So no, like I will support you. And then, you know, really believing him, and it did. Like, I look back on it and I'm like, this total brainwash feel, you know, like I would never have imagined that he would have ever done this to anybody else. Like, he had me totally convinced that like this was a one-off thing. It was, you know, it happens, you know, I'm married, but like it happens. And I just always felt, for 20 years, I felt guilty of like allowing him to do that when he was married, and terrible for his wife. And there were a few times along the way that I thought, does Sue need to know about this? Like, does she need to know? Like, I don't want to cause her more pain than I thought it would cause her more pain. And then I found out she had cancer, and I was really like torn between what to do, because it wasn't that far before I saw Leaving Neverland that I found out that she had cancer. So then I was like really conflicted of like, oh gosh, you know, if I pull this up into the public eye, and what happens to him is what should happen to him, that he shouldn't be coaching anymore. Obviously, he's not capable of handling a relationship with an athlete that's of the opposite sex. Like, it's apparent. I just felt like I was conflicted. So I sought therapy. I went to a counselor, and she was the first one to hear about it. And she was like, oh my
This
gosh.
was after you watched Leaving Neverland?
Yeah. Yeah. It was after I watched Leaving Neverland that I was like, I've got something that I need to get off my back, because I did not have any skeletons in my closet. That was one thing. Like, about 15 years ago, there was one other thing that had happened between myself and one of my teammates in college, and a guy that I dated had broken up with her to date me. And it was just a little, there was a little bit of an overlap, and I couldn't live with myself anymore. So I felt I had like 2 skeletons in my closet. That was one. And then the other one was this relationship that I had with my coach. And so I made a commitment at that time that I was not going to die without kind of coming to terms and apologizing and about everything. But the one thing I couldn't do was say anything about this coach athlete relationship. So I apologized to her. She's like, oh my gosh, it's no big deal. Like, we're adults now. I'm glad that relationship didn't happen. And I was like, well, me too. But that was like the one skeleton in my closet that was left. And I never thought I would ever have the courage to talk about it. But at some point, knowing that he was coaching high school girls at the time, that the knowledge of that ended up kind of trumping how I was going to feel about myself. And I thought, I've got a duty to get him out of coaching, because it's just not fair. It's not fair to girls if I don't say something for it to continue to happen.
And that is one of the most powerful things. Going back to this quote, the next sentence from that same USA Today article is, you said, but I decided that I couldn't stay silent any longer. If I did, so many more girls would continue to be abused. And that is just to the responsibility and the action that you have taken since is, it is so selfless. Erin, just a little aside from me, the fact that you were able to find your courage, you're in fact not only genuinely helping yourself and your own health, but potentially life-saving for other people. So that's super powerful, and encouraging to others that are listening that are in your same position, other track athletes from these universities. So with Leaving Neverland, and you're in therapy and understanding more that how deep the grooming process was. You said at one stage also that it was so slow, you didn't even know it was happening. Were there any other just overwhelming triggers in that movie that you found yourself dealing with, for other listeners that might be coming to terms with this? Things that you wouldn't have recognized in the past that movie pulled up and you said, wow, that's me, that happened to me?
Yeah, it was the deep relationship that Michael Jackson had with the parents of these kids. He made the parents of the kids feel like so special. You watch the look on the face of the parents of these kids where it happened. And, I think if I remember correctly, I've only watched it once. I did never go back and watch it again for obvious reasons. But one of the guys that comes forward with it is kind of still in that stage of like, I don't know if I can forgive my parents for this. I don't know if you remember that. And then the other one is like,
he's actually from Australia. I researched him. His name is Wade Robson. He's had an incredible thing, but yeah, he's an Australian. And it sounded like Michael Jackson, from what I saw, groomed this guy's parents as hard, if not more calculating than Wade to get to Wade. So was that your experience with the?
Yeah, I mean, that was my experience. I think, he was constantly, John would like send me gifts he was constantly doing nice things for my parents. It was very similar, which is why it resonated so much. I mean, it's the gift giving and the calls and the relationships, and you just start to trust this person.
So how did your parents, though, in the movie, I'm seeing so many parallels. So the grooming process is happening with your parents, and you've said that you guys are a tight family. It's not like you're very tight, what's going on in each other's lives. So the phone calls is the thing that stood out to me in the Michael Jackson story, with these young boys who were 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, and long 2-hour, 3-hour daily conversations on the phone. So when this 35-year-old track coach is calling you in your home when you're 16, 17 years old, before you've even gotten out of the house to college, is the grooming process so severe that your parents how does that work? Because is that natural for us to have those conversations with a 35-year-old coach for hours on the phone?
Right. I think it back then, especially, it was not even a thought of like what's happening, because the one thing I will say is that there is no manual on how to raise an Olympic athlete, and so beyond the fact that my parents weren't elite athletes, even if they were, I mean, an Olympian is like a totally different. So your kid says, I want to go to the Olympics. And as a parent, you're like, oh my gosh, I must provide them every opportunity to accomplish this goal. She's obviously very serious about this. I mean, she doesn't date. She doesn't hardly do anything except for think about the Olympics, I mean, just to give you an idea, I had my whole house, around all the walls in the house was a tape mark, a black tape mark at the world record. And it went all the way around my house.
And how high was that in meters? Huh?
It was 2 meters and 9. So it would have been 210. And so it was basically like, so that every time I would be in my house or walk around the house, like I would be looking at what it was that, they say that, you look at it and you see it all the time, that you're going to do it. And so
that's right.
And so I had that in my house so that it wouldn't look foreign to me when the bar actually got to that height and I had to jump over it. So that is how obsessed I was with making an Olympic team. And like I said, I don't think that parents know, like, what do I do? What do I do to raise an Olympic athlete? If she wants to talk to her coach about, for an hour or two every night, like I guess there's stuff to talk about. I don't know,
It goes back to that power imbalance with those young kids who were, they were very specialty dancers and talented young kids. So they weren't pulled into Michael Jackson's realm because they were just cute or something. They actually had a lot of talent. So he preyed on that, and he preyed on their dreams, just like it sounds that your former coach was preying on your dreams. And then to that next awful level, preying on your parents, knowing that that's their kid and you do anything for your child. You and I both have children. You give your whole life for these kids. So there's that. And in order to get to the kid,
the parents are like the door to the children, so you've got to work on them hard.
So would you say for people listening, just as warning signs, just so that there are, like you said, it was so subtle and such a long process, you didn't even know it was happening. Of course, your parents didn't know it was happening. So what are those critical warning signs that you would just blast out there for people going through something like this?
Just, any conversations that are in private for an extended period of time. Like, I think that, 30 minutes once a week is probably sufficient, nothing needs to be talked about that long, and nothing can be talked about really that long. Like, you can't talk high jump technique for that many hours, I mean, there were one of the most vivid memories I have of when this process kind of started to transition into more of like a sexual one was when he was like, oh, I want to see your senior pictures. And I think this is in the article as well. And so I was like, oh, okay. Like I showed him my senior pictures and he's like, that one is my favorite. I love that line on the side of your legs when your legs are crossed, that like iliotibial band. Like that's my favorite muscle. And I was just like, oh my God, he thinks my legs are hot, you know? And I mean, it's just silly, but there's no reason for your kids to be talking on the phone or to be in a private place situation with, I would say, I mean, I was about to say someone of the opposite sex, but like anyone that is older, that's in an authority position, because it doesn't need to happen. And, you know, of course my parents know that now. Back then this stuff was not talked about. So they have, like, when they heard my story, they were obviously mortified. And my mom still occasionally is like, how did I let that happen? And I'm like, Mom, it's not your fault. I wouldn't have known either, you know, I would have done anything for my kid to have them. But yeah, like never send your kid to some event by themselves with a coach. It's when they're that young, you know.
You were separated again. I saw these kids go from, say, for example, this one kid, Wade Robson, flown from his home in Sydney to Los Angeles, and that separation of the student athlete or the child from the parents.
Yeah.
And then you going to Sydney, Australia, your story is quite profound. You're a young teenager going with your coach to a foreign country with no form of communication, completely separated from your family. And this is the person that is protecting and safeguarding you, and the person that's supposed to be looking after you. So I don't know, did he have much to do in the decision of him getting that role to go to Sydney? Was that something?
I mean, I'm sure it was like
part of the whole process.
Probably super excited when my high school coach couldn't go. I was like, well, I mean, I'm happy to take her, you know. Well, my parents were like, well, I mean, I guess, you know, she'll be his athlete at Arizona, you know, in a few months, because it was the summer after my senior year, you know. So it's like, well, that's who's going to coach her in college. So I guess that's the next best thing.
And you had no other teammates with you? It was just the two of you?
No, we had, I mean, it was Team USA. So, but we weren't all in the same flight. Like we take different flights from different locations, and then you all meet in Sydney. And so we had, you know, our whole Team USA in one hotel. But I'm trying to even think if we had roommates. I don't even remember. But he had his own room, so which my parents paid for. So my parents paid for all of it, and always did. My parents paid for his hotel rooms and for him to travel Europe with me the summer after my freshman year in college to go do the European tour, so that my coach would be with me, so that I could do my best, you know. And of course, it was all, I mean, by that time though, we were like literally in a relationship. So, but they're just, I mean, my poor parents are like, what happened? Because it was just, like I said, grooming is such a slow, methodical process, and you do not know it's happening. And that is why, of all the forms of sexual abuse, they're all absolutely horrible in their own ways, right? But grooming is like so scary because it's so slow and you don't know it, and you're stuck before you realize like you're in a relationship now.
So, you know? And it's when you get to that point in the movie and you understand, all right, this is this is all coming to the surface for you now. Then you land in therapy, which means, okay, it's telling me that your mind is going, I've got to do something here. What happens after that, Erin? How long is it before you start speaking out? Who's the first person you told?
I told my husband.
How did you tell him?
I remember like it was yesterday. I think he was like, what is up with her? But he like couldn't really figure it out, like just that day, but this has gone on for like a month and a half. It took me a while before I got up the courage to say something. And I remember him saying something, I can't remember exactly what it was, that kind of like triggered the emotions, but we had kids in the back seat. We were on our way to go to the YMCA to work out, and there were kids in the back seat. So he says something, and I'm like, it was something about like trauma that he experienced, which was like nothing like to the point of what it was that I was experiencing, but it's like something super small. And I was like, you just don't understand. And he's like, what do you mean I don't understand? And so I was like, let's just go get the kids in childcare and then come back and talk to me in the car. So I was like, oh my God, it's happening. So he went and put the kids in childcare, came back in the car, and he's like, what's up? Like, what is up? And I was like, okay, you really want to know? You want to know what's going on? And he was like, yeah. And I'm like, John, the John that you love, because he's now groomed my husband to get into his good graces, because he doesn't want me to ever say anything. So he needs everybody to like think he's great. So my husband's like, yeah, like we've gone to dinner with John and paid for his dinner all the time. He's come to our house and stayed in our, guest bedroom. Like he's like your best friend, right? Your coach, you experienced an Olympic team together. And I was like, yeah, but he groomed me when I was in high school. And how I always, like you say, we talk about our first kisses and all that kind of stuff. John was my first kiss. And then I went on and like told him all this stuff, and he was just floored, like in total shock. And I was like, that's what's going on. Like that's what I'm dealing with right now. And he's like, oh my God.
How did that make you feel
crazy.
When you said that the first time to him?
In a weird way, just like a total weight had come off of my shoulders, because I had been nervous to tell my husband about this, because I was like nervous now for a couple reasons. Number one was that I didn't know what he would think of me. Am I suddenly like not the great wife or, partner that he thought I always was, like I've got these crazy things in my past. And then number two, I was worried that he would feel that I deceived him, that we tell each other everything. Like we've been married for 8 years at this time. And like, you've never told me about this. Like I married you, he was in our wedding, and you never told me about this. So I didn't know how he would respond, but he was very caring, very supportive. I felt a huge weight off my shoulders, because he wasn't angry at me. He was just in complete shock. It was taking him some time to process it, but there wasn't anger there, which I was like, thank God, because that was what I was worried about this whole time. So then he was in therapy with me to like try to unpack all this. And I had no intention of bringing this public. I really, at that time, I just wanted it for myself, because like I said, I didn't want to have any skeletons in my closet. And so after watching that movie, I thought I need to get rid of this one. For the first time in my life, I thought I need to get rid of this one. I need to like tell someone so that I can get it off my chest. And then after I told him, we went into therapy together to kind of unpack it and how it affected our lives as a married couple. And so he was amazing, still is. And then I thought, I kind of need to tell my parents, they need to know about this, but I thought I also don't want to tell them if it's going to cause more harm than good. But I also reached a point where I was like, I think I need to confront John about this. And like, why did you do this to me? Why did you think this was okay? You know, but I was worried about hurting him and the relationship that we had and all these things, all these emotions that come along with this kind of thing of like coming forward. But I wasn't in a place where I was like, where I had the courage to like come forward in a way that it was going to really hurt him, like his job, you know, and expose who he was as a coach. So that was like the whole progression in therapy of like, you know, coming to grips with certain pieces and going through all of those emotions of like sadness, anger, you know, all those grieving processes and tackling them one by one. And then
having to deal, like you said, with your own behavioral issues and mental and physical that come with bringing up poison, basically, and trying to release it. You have a lot of your own health concerns to be thinking about as well. You're saying you're thinking of your parents and John's feelings and all of this on top of what you're going through. So then it turns, so you're in therapy and it's all coming up and you have powerful feelings of telling more people. That's a big piece of this. And can you talk about that link then, where all of a sudden what you had thought was just something to get your skeletons out of the closet is now very quickly heading towards confronting John, which as we've seen, there is a lawsuit today. How does this all link up?
So it's a long process, but at some point I reached that moment where I thought I need to confront him about what he did, you know, and hoping that he would apologize and say, I did something wrong, you know, I'm sorry. But also knowing him as well as I did, I knew that probably wasn't the likely scenario because he's a pretty headstrong, I mean, the word is narcissistic person. And a lot of times people like that don't apologize. They actually dig their heels in further. So at this point, I still wasn't thinking anything about taking it to the media or, you know, like nothing. But I did know about Safe Sport, which they had enacted with the U.S. Olympic Committee.
I see that you filed, I did read how you filed a formal complaint with the United States Center for Safe Sport for people, for athletes out there. Erin, this is a really critical piece here, that not only you went there, but you knew about it. How'd you know about this organization? What is it for our listeners? And what was that process to file your complaint?
Yeah, so so Safe Sport was enacted, and Nancy Hogshead is one of the big amazing people behind that, and she can probably go into way further depth than I can. But it was enacted as a result, really.
Nancy Hogshead, civil rights lawyer, and 1984 three-time Olympic gold medalist.
Yes. Thank you for
one-time silver medalist at the 84 Olympics, where I actually was a 13-year-old girl in that stadium from LA, watching those opening ceremonies and seeing all that.
And that was me too, right? I was watching the 84 Olympics too.
I didn't want to interrupt you at the time, but the 1984 Olympics is a real connecting point for a lot of us with, and so was Kim Rodenbaugh-Llewellyn. She was also a swimmer in the 84 Olympics, and I was there watching them walk into the stadium.
Wow.
So I do know Nancy very well, and she is the powerhouse dynamite behind the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. She comes behind it with all the legislation that actually led up to the development of this actual organization that exists in Colorado today. So it's a phenomenal thing. So it's interesting now for our listeners, you're an athlete. I've read about this place, but I've never talked to or heard about a personal experience.
So U.S. Center for Safe Sport was enacted in order to stop sexual abuse. I mean, I feel like it's even now like emotional mental abuse, because we've seen some cases in gymnastics where
it is
gymnastics coaches have gotten suspended for just doing horrible things emotionally and mentally and physically. So, which is great that it's kind of moved beyond just sexual, but it really was started right about the time that we all know about the Larry Nassar case, where he sexually abused, hundreds of women, and it was awful. I read that whole book, which if you haven't, is definitely worth the read to understand the entire thing that happened and how he did it and how he groomed those girls.
Which book was that, Erin?
I'm trying to think. It was
by one of the gymnasts, or there's a lot of gymnasts.
No, it was by two reporters, I feel like, from ESPN.
Okay.
Larry Nassar book. Start by Believing.
What is it?
Start by Believing. It's called Start by Believing, and it's from John Barr and Dan Murphy.
Awesome. Okay.
And it is absolutely, you need to read it. That's all I can say. So it's incredible. And they started U.S. Center for Safe Sport for that very reason, because prior to that, there was really no place for athletes to go when they experienced these things. So, you know, they had to go to like their NGB or, you know, university or whatever it is and report that. Well, there's obviously a conflict of interest there. Like an NGB doesn't want to out themselves. National governing body.
National governing body, like the NCAA. Correct.
Yes. So when I talk about this, I say that the national governing body and NGB, or actually let's start with the U.S. Olympic Committee, is to the NCAA as an NGB is to a university, kind of, you know, like they're what kind of governs those NGBs, and the NCAA is kind of like what governs universities. So the Olympic Committee put this into effect in order to kind of hold accountable NGBs, you know, people that work for them, all of that. And I would love for you to talk to Nancy Hogshead Maker about this even further in depth, because I'm probably doing a terrible job of explaining it, but she's kind of the one that like built it all. So
well, it'll be amazing to hear her perspective from that legal perspective, but you are the athlete. So it's really powerful to hear your experience from the athletes that are out there thinking that potentially people that may be listening to you that are former track athletes from your universities that have a story to tell. Did you find in your experience that you felt safe? I've seen the website, I've gone to it, and in a big tab straight in the front is to file a complaint, hit this button. What makes them want to hit that button and feel they are going to be trusted or believed or safe?
That's a good question, because I went there, I think probably 1 or 2 times, and started filling it out and then bailed because of something about there was something that it said that it's legal stuff that you kind of have to say before you file a complaint. And I remember just getting cold feet a couple times prior to that. So I didn't actually end up pulling the trigger until I made that decision that it was okay with me that people knew about this, because it would go into a database and they would conduct their investigation, and it wouldn't say, I don't think, who it was, but you know, if my coach from college was being investigated, everyone would know who it was because of the relationship that we had. Like, people already had it on their radar of like, well, that relationship of that coach athlete is weird, you know? So I knew that people looked at us kind of like that. It was like the elephant in the room all the time, that I was always like, no, 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 no. But like everyone knew, you know?
So you didn't actually tell people you had a relationship, but everybody knew.
Everyone knew. I mean, yeah, everyone suspected, I guess I should say, you know, but there was no like physical evidence.
Just really quickly, just clarifying, how did you actually, as an athlete, know about the U.S. Center for Safe Sport? Is that something that is passed out via email to all athletes? How do you know about it?
I'm trying to think of how I knew about. I think I knew about it because of the Larry Nassar case, right, and reading about it and hearing about it. And I think it might have been mentioned a few times in that book.
Gotcha.
So I knew about it, and I knew that was probably my starting point.
So that's totally fascinating to me. And it's so important for people listening right now. I get chills because you said you went to the site, right, the tab button is right there, and twice you bailed on filing the complaint. Yeah. That's massive, because most times in these situations, it's so hard to talk about this stuff. You try one time, and if you can't get the courage up, you just bail altogether. So what was it the third time that you actually filed that complaint? What made you finally do it?
Here's what actually did it. And it's a pretty significant moment, because I'm trying to think of if I don't think I have the email. I might be able to find it if I dug it up hard enough, but I wrote John a letter from me to him, you know, and this was when I was in therapy and before I had made the decision to come forward. In order for my own healing to happen, I wrote him a letter that was basically like, I've sat on this for 20 years. I knew it was wrong. My parents raised me right. Why did you do this to me? You knew that I had never had any experience with anyone sexually. I have to live with the fact that you were my first when it should have been someone my own age that was not married. And, you know, I mean, I asked him a bunch of questions, one of which was like, would you be proud? Like if you, it was something to the effect of, would you be proud of telling Jared, which is his son, would you be proud telling your son this story? And would you be okay with it if he was the one that had done this? You know, like just kind of like hypothetical, rhetorical questions. And basically I just said, I want you to retire and never coach again. And if you can't do that, then I'm going to have to do it myself. You know, was this when you found out that he was coaching high school now at Los Gatos in Northern California? Yes. Or yes, high school girls like you were? Yeah. And I thought, oh God, that's horrifying, because I got sucked in over the phone, you know, like he wasn't even in my physical presence, but if he was in my physical presence, it would have happened earlier than that, unless he was so smart that like, he's not going to touch anybody until they're 18, you know? And that you can't take a chance on is where it sounds right. Like. Yeah. Right. So I wrote this letter and I thought, okay, I'm going to call him and I'm going to read it to him over the phone. And I wrote it out because typically I would just be like, fly by the seat of my pants and be like, blah, 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 you know, but I wanted to make sure I got everything out the way that I wanted to articulate it. And so that was by putting it down on paper, and I was going to read it to him. And so I tried to set up a time where we could talk so that it was more calculated of like, you know, are you available at such and such time? And he kind of knew what was going on because I'm trying to think of how he knew and what the timeline of all this was. But like there was, by this time I may have talked to one of his athletes that he had to tell them, I think I had, that's currently high jumping at SMU. And so she was very, very, very close to John. And so I told her, because I wanted to give her a good, the option to like tell me if anything had happened to her, which I thought something had, but I don't know. I don't know if something's happened to her at all, but anyway, I think she might have alluded to him or kind of let the cat out of the bag. And so he kind of knew something was going on. And so he started to kind of screen my calls and not respond to me, which is the first time ever, because we had that great relationship, right? And so I basically told myself, I'm going to give him one more shot to respond to me, because if he's not going to respond to me, then that makes me mad. You know, yeah. I want him to listen. And
you are mad right now.
if he's not going to give me the respect to listen to the story and to confront this, I don't feel as bad for him anymore. You know, I'm ready to like stop his coaching career because it needs to be. So I gave him one more shot, and I was like, I'm available I gave him a heads up, you know, like 2 or 3 times that I was available in the next few days. Like if he couldn't make one of those work, then it wasn't going to be a good thing. And he didn't. And so that was that pivotal moment when I turned from like empathetic to him in some way, and still kind of like, you know, feeling like it was my fault and I don't want to hurt him and those emotions, to like, nope, game on. Like he's not going to be able to coach anymore.
Flip the switch.
And I didn't feel like he was mature enough, or a decent enough person to be able to realize what he had done or come to terms and apologize. And I felt that he was still doing things that he shouldn't be doing. And so I thought he can't coach anymore.
So is that when you went back and hit the button?
That was the phone call. That was the, safe sport, 3rd time you're out kind of thing. Right. And like clicked the send. And because of, I actually included that note as an attachment in my report, and they've used it throughout this case. Never with, I didn't have that intention when I wrote it, but I'm actually like kind of like, well, I mean, if that's what they need to use as evidence, that's fine. But yeah, so I sent in the claim, and they felt like it was serious enough to start the investigation immediately. And one thing that you kind of have to know about safe sport is, Nancy might have this exact statistic, but it is something crazy. Like 2 years ago, when I submitted this complaint, 2 years ago, it was like they had received something crazy, and don't quote me, but like 4,000 reports in like 3 years. I don't know. Have you heard the statistic? It's something.
I'm not going to be quoted either, and we'll get Nancy because she'll spit these things out perfectly. But you're completely right. The statistics are shocking at how many claims went just funneling through this organization, and the amount of staff that they had. It was just completely imbalanced to manage that.
Floodgates opened,
and just shocking, not only just to see what's going on out there. And there's finally one organization that is in a position to specifically manage these things. So where have all these situations been sitting just out there, and now they're all coming into the hub?
Internal, just sitting, festering inside people. And now there is a place to report, and the floodgates have opened. And as you know, and unfortunately, Safe Sport is not large enough to be equipped to handle them all. So I feel super blessed that they took my case and handled it immediately. And I think the reason they did was because he was coaching minors.
Sure.
When I filed, I think that's the only reason. If that had not been the case, I think ours would still be in the queue.
So here's another question then for you. This will be very critical for anyone listening that is an athlete in the late 90s to 2000 or the 90s to 2000s, that any track athlete that has been coached by John Rimbaud, they're sitting here right now. They've been in silence for all of these years. There will be somebody that is on the brink of wanting to tell their story and come forward and lock arms with you. What should they do? Is U.S. Center for Safe Sport the place for them to go? What would you say to them as far as what you said? You felt lucky that they took your case. So your case is now a reality. So if they were to come forward, they'd be attached to this lawsuit that's actually got legs on it. Is that the right place for them to go first, or what would you say?
Yeah, so I would take it back even further, because we know, he's been coaching since the early 80s.
Correct.
And there were others prior to me. So anyone from the early 80s till now should probably go to Safe Sport and should reach out to our attorney, Beth Fagan, who is handling our case on an NCAA level. So there's the Safe Sport piece, which is, the Olympic level, and just making sure that he is not able to coach anymore. So he's on suspension. The case is now pretty much closed. We've been through mediation. He is officially suspended. So he will not be coaching anymore in the near future.
So to give a big high five to U.S. Center for Safe Sport, you got a result, Erin. You just said, as a result of you filing this claim against him, he's been suspended from coaching. That's a huge result. You've got something extraordinary happening here. You've connected again with two former cross-country track athletes. So you've got Jessica Johnson and Londa Bevins and yourself, who are the three women that have filed this class action lawsuit together. In your estimation, you are not alone out there, and there are others listening over a long career of John's that have been in this same situation and have experienced this type of abuse. So from here, you have an incredible team, the three of you. You've got the NCAA here. Talking about the laws, the NCAA acknowledges that any sexual contact between a coach and a student athlete is sexual abuse, because the coach holds all the power and the student athlete holds none. And then further in the claim in this class action, which I read, despite this, the NCAA does not categorically prohibit such behavior. That lack of institutional boundary setting has allowed coaches with bad boundaries to continue taking advantage of young, vulnerable athletes. So here we are. This is a time, Erin, where the laws are just seemingly criminal. They're not protecting our athletes. They're not empowering our athletes. Institutional change needs to happen. Otherwise, the result is the continued abuse of our athletes out there right now and in our future. I have a young daughter, 2 boys. You have 2 children. These are the next generation of athletes potentially that walk into this system of abuse that exists today. I'd like you to take this time, Erin. You have a team. You've got your family around you. You've got your lawyers. You've got the class action lawsuit in progress. You are motivated in the core, as I've read, for the institutional change, so that you've put yourself on the line and your entire life to prevent this happening to other people. please take this time to speak to those listeners, those athletes out there that are tuning in, that have this story, that could come forward, that let them know what their contribution can be to this. Just whatever you'd like to say to them, have the opportunity to say it.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that the NCAA does not have the ability to cherry pick what they want to police. And in this instance, this is such an important change that I think that we're trying to make, because this is the future. This is the future of young women and men who are extremely vulnerable at this period of their life, going through college and before college, being groomed or sexually abused in any other way. And we know that there are several others out there, hundreds, thousands maybe, who have the same story as I do, the same story of others who have experienced some other form of sexual abuse, and from a different coach. And you're not alone. You're not alone in this, and this is nothing to be ashamed of. You were taken advantage of. There is a significant power imbalance that needs to be stopped, and these coaches need to be held accountable. And that's what we're going for. We're going for a system where something similar to the U.S. Center for Safe Sport can be created on an NCAA level, that there's also a database when a coach is reported, that their name goes into the database, so that they can't go from university to university to university continually doing the same thing. My coach started his career at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, where he did things that weren't appropriate. He then went to the University of Arizona, where my abuse happened. He then went to the University of Texas, where Jessica Johnson's abuse happened. He then went to Southern Methodist University, where, you know, we're subpoenaing all universities where he was, to find out if there's any other information that was reported during that time. He went to Stanford University, Cal Berkeley, and then now is coaching high school, or was coaching high school girls. And in my opinion, he was coaching high school girls probably because his rope had ended. And that was the only place that he could go where there was no reputation necessarily. So it's time. Your time is now to come forward, tell your story. You're only helping people with this. Unfortunately, with the Me Too movement, this is not looked upon as, you know, something terrible that someone in a lesser position and a position that was not authority, if it happened to them, like this is a problem that we have with society. And I encourage anyone who experienced something similar to come forward.
Wonderful. And at this stage, so anybody listening that has a story that they're thinking of sharing, you can look at Safe Sport. There's the website, U.S. Center for Safe Sport. You have your attorney, Beth Fagan. They could look up. And what's the next step in the legal process? Where are you right now?
Yeah, so we are waiting for, I believe we're waiting for a response from the NCAA in the Indiana courts. And of course, you know, this legal process takes a long time. It could be years, hopefully not. But the ball, I believe, is in their court at this point. So strangely enough, I don't keep, you know, up to date with everything that's going on a daily basis, because it would just take up too much of my emotional space. And I try to that's why I hired an attorney, because I hired someone that I knew was very good. She represented the victims of Harvey Weinstein. She has a lot of experience with this. She also represented the victims of football concussion in NCAA. So she's been against the NCAA before. And so, you know, by hiring her, I was just like, this is the story. You take it, you run with it. I'll be back to listen to occasional updates, but I've got to live my life and move on. And it was never supposed to be part of my story that I was going to have to come forward with this anyway. And it's horrifying as it is. So I don't want to continue with that.
I appreciate what you're going through. Incredibly difficult circumstances. And just on that note, I'm not being conscious of your time. The responsibility and action that you've taken is something that is in my mind gold medal class. Erin, this is tough stuff. It's easy to sweep under the rug. It's easy to just tell your family and move on and not deal with it. But the fact that there is the opportunity for coaches to continue doing and abusing their athletes today and in the future without this kind of institutional change from the governing bodies is very, very scary. It's frightening. And the only way that the changes are going to happen are because of people like you. You are single-handedly with Jessica and Londa making this happen. And it is so, so overwhelmingly powerful to see what you're doing on behalf of people you don't even know. So I just want to thank you personally for that. It's extraordinary what you're doing, your responsibility to others. So that's world class, man. That's amazing. And all the best with that. So as we go forward, you said it could be a long drawn out process here at Open Stance. Gosh, we'd love to have you back at another time to keep updated, hear what the progress is, stay up to date with what's happening, and you know, root you on and support you in any way that we can. And on that, thank you for being here today. I know it's Mother's Day coming up, so wishing you an amazing Mother's Day in Dallas, Texas, with your husband and your lovely 2 boys.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having this podcast. I mean, this is helping so much to get the word out. Without these kinds of platforms, it would be so much more difficult to spread the word. So I truly, truly appreciate everything that you're doing with Open Stance and allowing me to share my story and, you know, hopefully helping others to just feel more comfortable to come forward, because it's all too common and it needs to stop. It really does.
And that's literally the motivation and the core of what I'm doing here at Open Stance. This is for all of us. This is just a channel. It's a vessel. It's something that was created to connect and unify voices. That's literally the bottom line of why we're here. And one voice is powerful. You have 3 voices in your case, which is already showing the power of what 3 voices can do. And again, this podcast, to share this, is a way to unify. And like you mentioned before, sending that message that you are not alone out there, people. We can bring you all together. There is a place for you on a team of people that understand and that support you, that you can trust and that believe you. And that's literally what the whole genesis of this platform is not just to tell stories, but to educate, create awareness, and bring people together, especially in a case like this, Erin, that you're doing. To be able to have more voices just lends to a bigger chance that you'll be able to dislodge the bar, as you would say, in the high jump world. Like you've always tried to not dislodge the bar. I would imagine right now is the opposite. You're trying to dislodge that bar and make the change. So
knock it down.
Let's share this and reach as many people as we can, and because they're out there, we know that. And let's get those laws changed. And I hope you feel like you were never alone. To learn more about Champion Women and for help with any issues related to women in sport, such as sexual harassment and abuse, participation, or pregnancy discrimination, please visit www.championwomen.org. And the U.S. Center for Safe Sport offers live confidential help over the phone on 866-200-0796.